All right, so my name is Lars Port, and I am an assistant professor at the Institute of Learning at Fick, the University of Greenland. Today I will tell you about the contexts for schooling in Greenland, what elementary schooling is in Greenland, and a bit about the recent developments in how schools and the education system uses technology, iPads in particular. I have lived in Greenland for 19 years, the first 6 years as a teacher in the north, teaching earth science and language. In 2008, I moved to Nuuk, the capital, to work as a science consultant for the government, or the Greenland Home Rule government. For the following 3.5 years, I worked with implementing new teaching strategies in science teaching, inquiry-based science education, among other things. Since 2012, I had worked at the University of Greenland, Fick, as a teacher education project. First as a PhD student and fully employed from 2016. I teach earth science and inquiry-based science. About 50% of my workload is in research in education and elementary and secondary education. First, a bit about the history of schooling in Greenland. There has been some kind of organized teaching in schooling since the 1700s. In 1721, Hans Egede, a Norwegian or Danish priest from Bergen, came to Greenland with the hope of converting the Norse who he knew had settled in the south of Greenland some 700 years earlier. He knew they were Catholics, and he hoped that he would be able to convert them to the Lutheran Church. However, he did not find any of the Norse, and he instead set forth the task of converting the local Inuit to Christianity. And he did that in the area which is now Nuuk. At that time, up until recently, it was called Godhope, the Good Hope. And this was more or less the beginning of education in Greenland. In the years after, children and adults were taught basic reading skills and in their own language, so that they were able to read the Bible and other religious texts. In 1845, the Teachers Training College was established in Nuuk, Godhope, and with the aim of training catechists to be sent out to settlements along the immense coastline to teach children to read the catechismus and basic arithmetic. In 1907, a new building for the Teachers Training College was built. This building is still in operation. This is where I partly work. It's a building that's more than 100 years old. It's very unsuitable for teaching training college. Midwinter temperatures in my office is about +8 degrees centigrade. So it's a museum basically, but that's where I work half my time. So fast forward to 1953. In 1953, Greenland was formally went from being a colony to being a county in Denmark. And in 1979, Greenland was granted home rule, and the first area of responsibility that was transferred from Denmark to Greenland to the new home rule government was education, which happened in 1980, the year after. In 2009, Greenland was granted self-rule status. As of now, there are 56,000 inhabitants in the country. They live in 53 settlements and 18 towns along the coastline. On the map here, you see the 18 towns with red dots. You have Grönland in the very far north, Upernavik, Uummannaq, Pardasok, Ilulissat, Qasigiannguit, and so on, all along the coastline down to the very south. And then 2 towns in the east coast of Greenland, Tasiilaq and Ittoqqortoormiit on the far north. These are the 18 towns. Aside from that, there are 53 settlements. 40% of the population have an education above grade 10 in public schooling. This also means that 60% only have grade 10 from public education. This also means that high skilled labor comes from the outside, primarily from Denmark. Greenland also receives a block grant from Denmark, which amounts to about 1/4 of the GDP. That is both a sum of money, about 3.9 billion Danish kroners per year. On top of that, there's Denmark takes care of defense of Greenland and SAR, search and rescue operations, among other things. Back to education. There are about 1,100 teachers in Greenland. 90 teachers are trained outside Greenland, primarily Denmark. We have about 180 teachers who don't have any educational background for teaching. Often their only background is a high school degree or just grade 10 in public schooling. The majority of the 180 teachers work in settlement schools. So this map shows you the distance that between the arrow, one end points to the farthest most natural inhabited settlement in the world, Siorapaluk, which is on 77 northern latitude. And then you have Nassamit in the very south, about 2,000 kilometers between the two settlements. I'll go back to one slide. We have 5 municipalities in Greenland. We have Avanata, Takatalik, Takata, Samasok, and Guitlek. And each of the 5 municipalities have the responsibility for public education. The Department of Education has the I don't know what just happened. Sorry. Okay. But let's take a look at the reality that students and teachers face in Greenland. Apart from the very one of the thing, if you look at the geography of the country and the way that settlements and towns are situated along the coastline also means that traveling is often done by helicopter. As there are no interconnecting roads or rail in Greenland, we don't have any way to travel between towns and settlement except by helicopter, boats, or in some places, in places where there are winter ice, we do use dog sleds or snowmobile. So aside from just to reverberate just a bit, traveling by helicopter and boat is very expensive. Going back and forth between towns, and especially planes and helicopters, is expensive. A trip for me, for going from Nuuk to Uummannaq, where about 700-800 kilometers further north, would cost me around $2,000 US. Just to give you some sort of an idea about the costs of traveling within the country. What is also an important issue for educational schooling, aside from the geography and the distance, is the immense social problems, often with alcohol as a key player. Greenland has the highest rate of suicide in the world, with 82 per 100,000 inhabitants. The world average is 11.2. And social problems in communities have immense implications for teaching. Students would come to school from a broken down home without breakfast or fearing to go home, staying out all night, are not ready to take part in teaching activities. In some schools, that is a huge problem. In some schools, it's not a problem. It depends on town, municipality, or part of a town. So let's look at a settlement school. This is a photo from a settlement in the Upernavik district, which is about 1,000 kilometers north from Nuuk. In settlements, teaching ends after grade 8 or 9, and then the students have to move to the nearest town to finish school in grade 9 and or 10. Most settlement schools are very small. Some as small as only 4 students, others as large as 60 or 70. This particular school in the photo has about 30 students. Because there are very few students in a school, students are taught across grades. For instance, grade 1 through 3 are taught together as one class. Grade 4 and 5 are taught together. And also in winter, in settlement schools that have winter ice, this is another settlement school up north. In settlement schools that are close to winter ice in the north, students and teachers also often use the winter ice for teaching activities. In this particular teaching activity on the photo here, it shows a group of students from a settlement up north ice fishing, and at the same time also measuring the depth of the fjord in order to get a sense of which fish lives at or inhabits a certain depth of the fjord. All right, let's look at a town school. This is a town school, might not be so obvious, but this is the island where I lived for 4 years, Uummannaq, where there is a town here. And in a town school, in the 18 towns, you would have grades 1 through 10. And students from the settlements near Uummannaq would come to Uummannaq after grade 8 or 9. There's a settlement out here. And then in grade 9 and 10, they would live in Uummannaq and finish school. There would be more teachers in a town school. And yeah, again, closer look at the school, the island and the town. It's difficult to see. Here's a closer photo. This is the photo. The school in Uummannaq. What is interesting about how schooling is organized in particular towns is that grades are divided. Grades 1 through 10 are divided into 3 steps: 1 to 3. Step 2 is 4 to 7, and step 3 is 8 to 10. Teachers are then locked within 1 step, so one teacher would teach only step 1 or 2 or 3. This, however, has a downside to it, is that there might be a fully capable biology teacher teaching in step 2 or 3, but cannot teach biology in step 2, which is then taught by the English teacher who is not qualified to teach biology. And then in step 3, there is a lack of an English teacher, but he or she teaches in step 2 and is not able to teach in step 3. It's very complicated, and it hinders qualified teaching across in the grades.
So, Lars,
yeah.
If we don't understand it correctly, if they are in grade 10, they have to move from the settlements into a town.
If they after, okay, I'll just go back a bit. So this is Umanak in the fjord system. Umanak is here. This is the town, and around Umanak there are now 5 settlements. In the settlements, students finish school in grade 8. To finish the school system, which is 10 years, they move from the settlement to Umanak to finish schooling in grade 9 and 10. And while they're in Umanak, they live in a student home with all the other students from the other settlements and 2 or 3 adults to take care of them.
Who is going to pay for that?
How do you say, the system? Yeah, the system pays for lodging, for food, for transportation back and forth once a year. Yeah, all right. Yeah, so this school was my everyday life for 4 years while I lived in the north. This is Nuuk. This is an aerial photo of Nuuk. In Nuuk, we have five public schools and 1 private school. This is one of the 5 schools in Nuuk. It's a fairly new school. It's from 2011. And I just would like to just linger a bit about that. If we take a look at the outcome of schooling in Greenland. As I said before, there are one of the realities that face teachers in Greenland and students is that there are quite a bit of social issues concerning children and families in Greenland. And if we look at what happened at the past 10 years, we see that student outcome of schooling as measured in the final tests after grade 10 is that we can see a downward trend in pretty much all subjects, except Greenlandic, which is stable. Mathematics as a subject is especially challenged. In 2015, a public schooling was evaluated by an independent organization, and that found that schooling seems to fail, well, more or less on many variables. However, responsibility for that fail rests on many levels in the system: teachers, students, social backgrounds, administration, etc. One approach that has been, in recent years, has been initiated to ameliorate for the situation in the public schooling is a joint municipality project that has as its goal to heighten teachers' didactical competences through the use of iPad and pedagogical qualification courses. The iPad project, or Kivitsisa, is partly funded externally and partly by the 5 municipalities. So the idea is that every student in the entire school system, which is about 7,500 students, will receive an iPad, and so will their teachers. And the teachers will then attend and will complete several courses in how to use the iPad in different subjects to make it relevant and to make relevant teaching. It was initiated in 2017, and it is expected to be fully implemented in 2024. In each school, 1 or 2 teachers will receive a wider range of courses in how to use the iPad, and he or she is then expected to help colleagues how to implement iPad in teaching. Where we are now is that we really don't know how this has had an effect on teaching, because we're still in the midst of the implementation phase. However, there are indications on that there are certain positive effects of the iPad in teaching. But it's too early to say something more certain on that. I work on 2 projects that are related to the iPad project. One is a research project that was initiated 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, with a teacher in a settlement about further up north. And the project is the goal of the project is to discover to look into how implementing iPads into a settlement science teaching setting where there's no Wi-Fi, there's no equipment for science teaching, and there's no support from the municipality school, the head school. How will the implementation of an iPad with science, measurement, sensors for measuring temperature, humidity, etc. How will that affect teaching in that settlement, in science teaching? And the particular focus is on developing an inquiry approach to science. The second project is I'm involved in is partly linked to the iPad project, is the development of an app for the students' iPads. It's an app for science teaching, biology teaching, that explores an Arctic fjord system. It's a joint venture, project between the University of Grönland, which is here, where the arrow is, and the Greenland Climate Research Center, which is part of the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources, which is linked, which is close by the university. So the idea is to develop an app that has as its goal to bring in an Arctic fjord system into the classroom. Both if we look into phytoplankton, what's at the bottom of the fjord system, 800 meters below the surface. Different kind of bird species. And the idea is that we expect to finish the project in 2022, next year, and launch the app for the students' iPads in summer 2022. So aside from my regular science teaching at the Institute of Learning, I have also been involved in the joint science education project since 2017. It's a 3-week summer school that takes place in a place called Grönland, near the ice cap. And since 2018, I've had the opportunity to bring student teachers to the program. And the overall goal of the program is to inspire and train the next generation of polar and STEM professionals to improve the knowledge and awareness of polar science and its relevance to the world among students and educators. It's a 3-week summer school, as I said, and we work in the field and we work close to the ice cap. This is a group of students, high school students, on the edge of the ice cap, back towards the marine. JSEP is a collaboration between the Department of Education in Greenland, the University of Greenland, the Ministry of Education in Denmark, and Dartmouth College in the US. The idea is that we bring together high school students for 3 weeks, and we teach them fieldwork science. And for some years, we've had the opportunity also to go to the top of the ice cap. This photo shows East Grip, which is on almost on the top of the ice cap, where they are drilling up a new ice core. Yeah, and I think that was it for me. About 25 minutes, trying to give you an insight into what education is in Greenland. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lars, for this insight. There's a first question. Is the oops, now it disappeared. Is the here it is. Can you see it? I'm irritated because I hear myself 3 times,
Okay.
I suppose.
Hello?
Yeah, perhaps you can read it by yourself.
Yeah. I hope there is yeah, okay. So I think is the varying length of days and nights during the year reflected in the school's lessons hours? No. Well, some settlements, well, some schools, primarily settlements, have the opportunity to change the way they organize teaching lessons and days when they teach around the year. So in some settlements, they have a longer summer holidays, and then they teach also on Saturdays during the winter holiday. And that way they have a longer summer holiday to go hunting and fishing.
Thanks. So feel free to note your questions. Can you tell us a little bit more about the iPad project? In the
Okay, there is one here. I do not see a playground on the photos. How is it done with breaks and day structure? Well, almost all schools have a playground. All big sort of town schools would have a playground. Small settlement schools, they would just in breaks, students would go out, play in the snow, play football, hang out outside. Yeah, that would basically be it. And also in some places, especially in the south and the east, most playgrounds would be covered in snow within a few months after winter starts. On the east coast of Greenland, you would have 3, 4, 5 meters of snow during the winter. All right, so yeah, I can tell you about the iPad project. The idea, okay. I'll just, Rachel, I'll start briefly with your question. The iPad project was initiated in 2017 because municipalities and government was frustrated about how it went with schooling. And so they thought the idea was to bring in iPads, to bring in a new way of teaching to hopefully ameliorate for the poor outcome of schooling. The next question is about the effects of children on the problem with alcohol, suicide. Yes, it has an enormous effect on schooling, and it has an enormous effect on suicide. One thing that we unfortunately see is that suicides tend in some places to escalate. Just not so long ago, there were 2 suicides here in Nuuk, and a friend of the 2 persons that committed suicide further north, he also committed suicide because he had lost his 2 friends. So in some areas in Greenland, suicide is a big problem. It is very hard to deal with. It's a huge challenge for a class teacher, for a school, when one of their students have committed suicide. When I was a teacher I was working a year on the East Coast, and during that year there were 2 suicides in the settlement, and it was a rough period for all of us. Takes a lot of time, a lot of talk with the students to get on with life. There have been programs by the government to deal with it, but it has not been effective yet. Okay, share more detailed iPad for science education. Well, that's not been so far developed a Greenlandic iPad application for science education. That is what we are working on right now in the project I was talking about with the fjord system. We hope that it will be, we aim for it being finished in a year from now, just over a year. The goal of that project is to more or less take all the knowledge, not all, but a lot of the research from the institute here, and then put it into the app with both a virtual and a hands-on approach to what science education is. What is the climate change? Kanjabek, hello. How climate change affects Greenland? That's a good question. That's a really good question, because it depends on how you see how you phrase the question, more or less. Does climate change has an effect of the wild? That's one question. And yes, it has an effect on the wild. We see a huge loss of ice from the ice cap every year. 350 gigatons of ice is lost netto per year. That is around I think the last calculation I made was that the loss of ice every year amounts to equivalent to something around 300 or 400 African elephants in weight running off the ice cap every second throughout the year. That's more or less the amount of ice that Greenland loses every year. From a social point of view, it's only very few places that we have actually sort of had great effects from climate change. It's primarily in the north, where people are dependent on sea ice. Sea ice is more unstable. Weather patterns are changing. There are certain roads in Greenland that are built on permafrost that are thawing. So roads have waves on it. And there are places in the north where buildings start to shift. In Nuuk, we don't have permafrost, so here all buildings are built on bedrock, so we don't really see any changes here. A strange thing to the situation about climate change and the melt off of the ice cap is that though it amounts to a worldwide sea level rise, roughly 1 or 2 millimeters per year, we don't see a sea level rise in Greenland. We see a sea level fall because we lose ice in Greenland, which also means we lose weight. So actually the bedrock in Greenland is rising because ice is melting. So netto, we see in most of Greenland that the land is rising as a how do you say, as an effect of sea ice melt. Oh yeah, is there professional psychological support for the students in school? Yes, all schools, all of the 23 town schools have social workers employed at the school. Is there a difference to teach? Well, that's a good question. Is there a difference to teach children from the Inuits? I don't know how to phrase that, because the majority of people in Greenland are Inuit. I'm the odd one out. There are 56,000 people in Greenland, and 4,500 come from the outside. So people in Greenland are more or less Inuit or Galaslit, as people in Greenland call themselves. There's a big debate has been going on for a few years about who is Inuit, who is proper Greenlandic people, and it's a huge discussion in communities. So, and I think I've been teaching here for 19 years, working with students, working with people, children for 19 years. And I think one of the major issues how do you say, if you really go into and the students can see that you are that you stay in Greenland and that you take part in what life they have. It's easy. It's not easy, but it's teaching can be quite a good experience with students in Greenland. I also find that students in Greenland are extremely capable of being, how do you say, especially when I worked in the north, not so much in Nuuk, but when I worked in the small towns and settlements in the north, I found that students were extremely capable of living in the outdoors and spending time in the outdoors and being comfortable in the outdoors. So that was a really, really good experience. How's the situation with suitable teaching materials? Is there a shortage of abundance? Well, all teaching materials is supplied to all schools free of charge from the Department of Education. All teaching materials are in 2 languages, Danish and Greenlandic. Teaching materials, aside from books, schools have to buy themselves from their own budget. And for settlement school, with a small budget, it can be a problem to have enough funds for buying suitable teaching materials. That's one of the reasons for the research project in the north, is that the small settlement school did have very few funds to buy proper science equipment. Can Swiss university students, no, sorry, that's not possible. It's just for Greenlandic, US, and Danish high school students. Sorry, it's otherwise a really good program. It's probably one of the best. It's the highlight of my year, is the 3 weeks in JSEP, even though it's 3 weeks with 18 hours of work every day from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10, 11 in the evening. It's 3 weeks of getting dirty every day, being in the field every day, and not getting any sleep, but it's all worth it. It's the highlight of every year. So which jobs are common in Greenland? Well, fishing is what makes up the bulk of fishing, and hunting is probably the 2 parts of the economy that supports the national GDP mostly. There are more and more students go into the university. The University of Greenland has had an increase in student uptake in about 20% over the last 10 years. So that is really good. The teachers are trained at the Institute of Learning where I work, and we have about 40 student teachers that graduate every year, every summer. It's a 4-year program. We have 1 or 2 students coming from the other Nordic countries every year, staying for a semester or so. Internet connection, that is a really good thing. Good question. Many settlements have very poor internet connections. Tele Greenland, who is the tele operations company in Greenland, they have promised that by this winter, I think, in December, all settlements should have a 4G network. So we hope that that will be a reality when we getting close to Christmas. But yeah. How are the job opportunities in Greenland? Good question. If you are an academic in Greenland, there is a 0% unemployment rate. So there are no one in the country with an education, more or less, that are unemployed. We have a very low unemployment rate in general, and as an academic, it's 0%. Professional dreams of students, they vary a lot. I think there are the classic ones: pilot for getting a job at Air Greenland, stewardess, getting into vocational studies, being a carpenter, a mechanic. There are more and more, as I said before, there are more and more students that aim for a higher education. However, we also still have a lot of students that stop their further education after grade 10, and some either don't come back or just come back into education many years later. Many students up in the north, after grade 10, there are students that say, why should I spend 4, 5, 6 years gaining an education, having a job where I can earn half of what if I go out in the fjord right now and start fishing. There are in many places up in the north, there are so much fish and so much money in fishing that many, well, particularly boys, they go into fishing instead of getting an education because they can earn more money. How are there any partnership with Danish schools? Yes, many schools in Greenland, they have a friend school in Denmark, and up until a few years ago, they would do exchange programs with the schools where the students from one or two of the schools they would send a class 1 or 2 months to Denmark to spend some time in a Danish school. And vice versa. A Danish school would come to Greenland. A class would come to Greenland. I've just read a bit about the Wikipedia about the term Eskimo. That's a good question. Whether or not we should use Eskimo. I think it would depend on who you would ask. If you look at the original meaning of the word Eskimo, it's about, as far as I remember, it's a term that is used to talk about people going outside to hunt their own food and to be a proud individual. Unfortunately, it has come to has a negative impact on how people understand the term. If you talk to people in Greenland, you would hear a young people who would say, no, we don't want to use the term Eskimo anymore, and you would hear a former high-ranking politician who would say, yes, I am an Eskimo. So it depends on who you would ask and what kind of reply you would get. So how's the population of Greenland changing? It's stable at the moment. For the past few years, it's been dropping a bit. And as in many other places in the world, the population is getting old. We have a demography of Greenland that is sort of tipping to the older generation. Often when students go outside to Denmark to get to an education, many, they stay in Denmark or in the Nordic countries and don't come back. One thing you need to know is that students in Greenland, they can get an education at the Danish university free of charge, just as a student from Denmark. And if you want to pursue the natural sciences, and you need to go abroad. It's not possible to study the natural sciences in Greenland. What do the girls do? The academics. We have a overload of girls at the university. We have very few men at the university, and perhaps not surprising, but that's the situation. I only know of one woman that actually have pursued fishing as a career in Greenland. Fishing and hunting. She's also very good at it. I would not. So the history of people coming to Greenland from the Americas is about 4,000 years old. There have been 4 or 5 major migrations from the Americas. The current population of Greenlandics came to Greenland about 1,000 years ago. It's called the Thule culture, and it has been it came up from the north, and that it was the Thule culture that came with dog sledding and building the kayak, etc. And that was in the past. That's not how a modern very few places in Greenland you still use a kayak for hunting. It's only in Grönland in the far north where they have to use a kayak for narwhal hunting. Other places where they are out in the water, it's a motorized boat, 250 horsepower, out shooting and hunting. So I would say that life in Greenland is in many respects very modern compared to what it was 50 years ago. So development of the society has gone very fast. What other possibilities are there to learn professionally from fishing? Well, in Greenland, it's possible to gain. There are, the last I checked, was 67 different kinds of educations you can complete in Greenland. So it's everything from 12 different educations at the university. Teaching degree is one of them. Airplane mechanic. You have a lot of vocational studies, carpenting, mechanic, commerce, banking. So we have 67 different sort of educations you can take in Greenland. We train our own people for working in the commerce fleet, fishing fleet, captains working in the engines, etc. What you must know is that in many places, a group of students tends to be very small because there are very few people in Greenland. It's not uncommon that at the teachers training college where I work, we would have a group of students with only 3 or 4 in a subject. I have taught a group of science students where there were 5 when they started and 2 when they finished after 4 years. So the group of students are very small, and that also tends to be it's a pedagogical issue to teach a group of students if there are only 2. Sometimes harder than when there are 20. What other possibilities are there to learn? What do you consider important skills in teacher education today? That's a really good question. I think one thing that I know that we are working on at the moment is that we need to train our student teachers to be better and more competent in using a digital approach to teaching. That's one thing. Another thing is that we need to be better at taking care of students with social problems. And then I think we need to be where we also have for the past 8 or 9 years have been working harder on is an inquiry approach to mathematics and science. It's difficult to measure the outcome of the past 9, 10 years of 5, 6, 7 years of our work at the teaching program, because it takes a long time to change reality in schools. So you would have a fully capable, fresh student teacher just finished his studies coming into a school that is sort of stuck in tradition, and so it would take a long time to change reality. What additional competencies does Greenland teacher need compared to teaching? I think an important, I think one of the things that we have been working on is this. I'm sitting in an office that's not mine, and the phone next to me is ringing. Oh, no, it's stopped. Okay. One of the things we've been working on also in the teaching program is a higher degree of attention to the role language plays in all subjects, and not just Greenlandic and Danish, but the role of what language is as a tool for mathematics, for social studies, for history, for science, because all subject has a sort of their own language, which is unique to the subject. So we have, in the past 4 or 5 years, given more attention to what role language is, and in the teaching program we have a special course that we give all our student teachers. It's called the language track that all student teachers must complete every year. That gives them competencies into using language in all subjects. Do you have your own teaching materials, or do you do it from Denmark? Rachel, do you mean my teaching or schools in Greenland?
Schools.
Oh, well, many schools, they depend on the teaching materials that are being developed by our publishing company under the Department of Education. They develop teaching materials for all subjects in both Greenlandic and Danish. So and they are being sent to all schools free of charge. They don't have to pay for it. How looks like a typical school working day for you? Well, that's a good question. I teach on an average year. I really don't teach that a lot. I teach about 120 hours per year, and the rest of my time is spent on research and projects with other institutions. But when I teach intensively, so it would be from 8 to 4 for 6 or 7 weeks, trying to get my students, depending on weather, to get my students outside doing field work, have them reflect on teaching, have them reflect on students, having reflect on learning and teaching, and coming back from work at 5 o'clock, preparing for the next day on and off for 6-7 weeks per semester. So that's, and then the rest of the year I'm even more busy with other projects. I'm fascinated by the very night-day lengths. How does infant life in Greenland? Also a very good question. I live in Nuuk, and Nuuk is below the Arctic Circle. So here we have, in the midst of winter, on the 21st of December, we have the sun rises at 11 a.m. and it sets around 2 p.m. So we have about 3 hours of the sun above the horizon. And retrospectively, in the height of summer, we have full daylight from 3:30 in the morning to past midnight. So it's broad daylight more or less all day long. Where I did work in the very far north, in Grönland, which is 77 northern latitude, we had winter darkness from October 24th until February 17th. In those 4 months, the sun was below the horizon. And that was dark most of the time. And in summer, equally, we would have a midnight sun from late April until the end of August. So it's yeah, it's for some people, they look forward to the summer where you can go out hunting and fishing and sailing for days and days and days. I myself look forward to getting our boat in the water in a few weeks. Right now we have 15 hours of daylight. So we're looking forward. I'll just change my screen so you can see out the window. The fjord is flat, the water is flat. I'm looking forward to getting out. And also when we approach September and the weather is getting bad and we have blizzards and winter coming, we actually look forward to the real dark months in December, where it's Christmas and it's cozy and we are indoors and we are outdoors, we ski and yeah. So it's there are ups and downs in both seasons, I think. Yeah, I tend to get very little sleep in summer. Do you extensively teach the students on the science behind the Green Daylight seasons? Do you? Yeah. It's part of when we teach Earth science that we work with angle of sun depending on latitude. To what extent does the lack of streets impact on social interaction? Oh well, there are streets in towns. It's just between towns and settlements there are no roads or rails. So what it does do to students is that going back home to parents that live far away is difficult and it's often very expensive. So students are stuck in a place for a longer period of time, and it can hinder social interaction. However, what I need to say is, in the past few years, with the outcome of Zoom and Skype and all the platforms, has meant a higher degree of virtual social interaction that has helped students interact with colleagues from around the coastline, fellow students and parents and family. How does parents' involvement in children's? Oh, that's a really good question, Shakika. I would wish I could say that parents' involvement is really good all over Greenland, and that is unfortunately not the case. In some schools, there's a really good collaboration between teachers and parents about schooling. In some other schools, parents would be very attentive to the students and at the first day of schooling in grade 1, and then expect to receive the students again after grade 10, fully functioning individual. And between the 10 years, the school sees very little, sees the parents very little. So in some schools, it's a huge issue that the parents are not more involved in the students' schooling. From Joachim, is it right that 30% of the Greenland state budget comes from Denmark? Yes, that's correct. I think it's about 25%, but yeah, that's true. It's the Greenland state budget is about 20 billion Danish kroners, and about 3.9 billion comes from Denmark as a block grant. Apart from that, Greenland also Denmark also pays for all search and rescue missions in Greenland that is run by the Danish fleet. Denmark takes care of all, how do you say, military operations in Greenland. Greenland does not have a military, not have a navy or air force. So a lot of the judicial system is also paid for by Denmark, and so is the police, and many other areas is run by Denmark, still paid for by Denmark. How does it influence the self-image of the? For some, a lot of also a really good issue. Just a couple of weeks, last week we had on April 6th we had a general election. And one of the big issues in the election campaign was the right to full independence from Denmark. Not long ago, there was a referendum, there was a survey among people in Denmark, in Greenland. And though many people in Greenland wish for independence from Denmark, there's also the majority of the population, they are realistic and they are fully aware of that we are not ready to be independent. We don't have the funds, we don't have the educated people to have a fully independent country. And many people are happy about being able to have a free education in Denmark, to go to hospital in Denmark free of charge, whenever there's something that the hospital in Nuuk cannot deal with. But yes, many people in Greenland would like independence, but they also very, the majority are realistic about it's not possible at the current state of how things are in Greenland. My visions for Greenland schools. I would like to say that they are positive. However, we are in let me put it another way. I think if things are to change in Greenland, if Greenland really wants independence, education must change. Accountability, responsibility for what takes place in the individual classroom must change. And it's not that Greenland does not spend a lot of money on education. I think Greenland spends around 1/20th of the GDP on schools in Greenland. There's about 1 billion kroner spent on the students in every year. So there's a lot of funds going into schools, but there are many levels of the education system that somehow doesn't work. So we have a long way ahead of us. We are working very hard at the Teachers Training College, the teaching program, to make things better. Ask me again in 5 years, I think. What steps are discussed to help students with social problems? Well, one of the things that we have done at where we work is, where I work is, all students in the teaching program must complete a 2-year course that deals with students with problems. That is aside their teaching subjects. And that we started that about 2 or 3 years ago. So we hope that will have an effect on the reality of getting back into schools. The language of the teaching language in schools. Well, there are two sides to that question, two answers to that question. One answer is that by law, the teaching language in schools is both Greenlandic and Danish. Reality is that most classes are taught in Greenlandic only. And that poses a problem for students when they go into high school, because in high school, after elementary school, almost all teaching is done in Danish, because most of the teachers in high schools come from Denmark. Yeah.
And what does it mean? What do they do, the teachers, if they've got a class with the students which don't speak?
Oh, they do speak Danish. It's just at a very low level. Because Danish is an obligatory, all students in the entire elementary school must be taught Danish as a subject in all 10 years. So students, after finishing high school, they have been taught Danish for 10 years. Often they've been taught Danish by a non-native speaker of Danish. And that affects how well you learn the language. I just looked up and there have been 31 cases of COVID. Yeah, we have lived a normal life, more or less, since March last year. Last year, we had 11 cases in Nuuk, and that meant a lockdown of the town for 1.5 weeks. And once they were cleared, we opened up again. One of the things at Greenland, that is an effective stop of COVID-19 is that in Greenland, you can just stop flying. If people don't get into the country, there's no more cases of COVID. So for the past year, there's only been partly opened flights from Denmark to Greenland. We also used to have a connection to Iceland, but that was stopped. All flights from Greenland to Denmark were stopped last year from March till June. And there were only emergency flights going in and out, and then freight. And during the summer, it was partly open for tourists to come into the country and out again. And since Christmas, flights has been cancelled again to and from Greenland. It's still possible to travel within the country domestically. And so far, it is set. Travel ban is set to last until May 2nd this year. But this also means that we can go around having a more or less normal life around the country. We don't wear face masks or anything. So that's a good thing. My sister lives in Denmark and she's being tested on a weekly basis. I have not been tested yet. So yeah. What about natural resources, gold, diamond, silver? Yeah, we have there are many natural resources in Greenland. We have two operating mines, one for rubies, one for another mineral, can't remember which. And there are golds and diamonds in the mountains. It just takes it's very difficult to get them out. The infrastructure is very difficult. And that sort of limits how many companies want to explore in Greenland. Many schools in Nuuk are heated by electricity. In Nuuk, we have a hydropower plant. So electricity is very cheap and it's abundant so far. Okay, good question from Marcel. The way I integrate iPads in my teaching is I use them primarily for doing inquiry-based science. Use them for data logging, for working with having students data being able to show them in a different way and exchange data between students and between students from different groups. I know my colleagues, they use them extensively for artwork and for the languages to create different kinds of teaching material themselves. Do teachers stick to teaching material for schools? That probably are. Do they? Oh well, many teachers, they stick with the material that is offered from the publishing company. Some schools, they put a lot of effort into having teachers develop their own material, but that is very much dependent on the head teacher on each school, what kind of line he or she sets for the development of the school. And oh yeah, and there are a national-wide platform where teachers exchange teaching material that they have developed. It's in both Grönlandic and Danish. Did the iPads change the way of education, Marcel? Oh, that's also a very good question. I would say it's too early to say. It's not fully implemented yet. I know in some schools they have changed the way some teaching takes place, and but in many schools they have they still wait for a full implementation of a proper internet connection, Wi-Fi, and in some schools they have not even had the iPads delivered yet. So, and I do know that an evaluation of the iPad implementation program is on its way and is being expected to finish in a year or two. What does motivate Danish teachers to high school students to go to teaching, and are there any incentives? Yeah, I think that many high school teachers and also public school teachers, I think well, I myself, I came to Greenland because many years ago, I wanted to experience the high north. I wanted to go out and be able to feel minus 40 degrees centigrade. I wanted to go dog sledding. I wanted to work in a place where there are very few people, where one is isolated. I wanted to try what it's like to teach people from different culture, to learn a different culture. And I got stuck in Greenland. And I do know that there are people that came with the same approach to Greenland. I do know that many high school teachers coming to Greenland, they come for the same reasons. I have a good friend of mine who works in a town 300 kilometers north, Sisimiut it's called. And he and his girlfriend came to Greenland for the same reasons, and they are now fully integrated in that town. They have their own dog team and go dog sledding every weekend, every holiday in the winter, and go sailing in the summer. And I think kind of like perhaps the slower speed of the communities. Things tend to, it's not as stressful as I know colleagues have in Denmark. And also I think one thing that might for some find an obstacle, but is also sort of fascinating that I find is that all our life is 100% dependent on weather. Just last week we had 46 meters per second blizzard, and that meant that resulted in a 6-hour power out in the entire town. So you live in a place where you are in many places on the mercy of the elements, and that's, some like it, some don't like it. I find it kind of fascinating that you go to school and you go to school in calm weather, and 10 minutes later, just before you get into school, the wind has picked up from 0 to 35 meters per second from the north. So it's also a way of experience, a different way of life. Do Danish teachers need to learn Greenlandic before starting their work? No. I speak very little Greenlandic. I've lived in the north and the east, and I learned a lot of Greenlandic for the past since 2008. I've lived in Nuuk, and I don't use Greenlandic very often. I use it with my students, but it's not. I can go about teaching my courses in Danish and the Greenlandic I know. Yeah, but we are, as employed by the university, we are offered courses, language courses in Greenlandic, free of charge, if we have the time for it. Advantages for teaching in Greenland. Kanjabek asked, well, my advantage is from, if I would have a similar position in Denmark, is that I think from a research perspective, half my time is spent on research in schooling, in science education, more or less. One of the advantages is that there has been almost zero research being done in Greenland in education at all. So I have more or less an open market for doing all the research I want. All project would be new to the country. So that makes every project that I could think of relevant to the society. And I think that is an immense possibility for someone like me to do that. And I think if we have all the teaching science here, is teaching outdoor science, teaching earth science is amazing, because you can go outside, you have the bedrock literally just 10 meters from my classroom. Teaching in winter, we teach ice and snow for 3 or 4 weeks, more or less. We can go out, we have snow just outside, we can teach meteorology, we can teach, everything is just outside, more or less just outside the door. And I find that fascinating. Any vacant places in Greenland? Yeah. There are many vacant places for not just teaching, but all public. I think alone in Nuuk, we have 20,000 people, 18,000 people living here. And there are in general almost between around 90 to 100 positions available for job openings, more or less all the time. So they look for high qualified people to come and give a hand for developing the country. Selection process, you have to be able to, good question, depending on the job. I've only known one teacher who was a native English. He was from England, but his wife was from Denmark, so he knew Danish, and he was employed as an English teacher in Denmark, I think. And then I know of a German. I had a German colleague, and she came to Greenland and spoke a little bit of Danish and learned Danish and Greenlandic quite fast. And she has now been in Greenland since 2008 and lived and married a Greenlandic guy up in the north. So there are vacant places for teaching. Yeah. Can you identify any typical values in Greenland which make that's a good question. I think one of the difficulties that is probably one of the issues that is challenging is that education in Greenland is very young. So having an inner understanding of what it means to have an education is for many students their first time experience. Very few of my students have had parents that have had an education themselves. I spend a lot of my teaching time, some of my teaching time is spent on having them being a student. What does it mean to be a student? Yeah, so I think that is, I don't know if it's a challenge, but it's an issue of education that at where I work, we spend a lot of time of preparing teachers for actually just being students and taking responsibility of their own student life, and that does take some time for them to get a hold of that.